the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to be with Gail Ghai. Gail, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Sure. I'm a poet. I have written other genres in vignettes. I've also done translations, and I've written a few short stories as well. But primarily, poetry is my focus.
How did you get started writing poetry?
Well, I was actually quite young, and I learned to write at home before I went to school. My older brother taught me how to write. And we had I lived in a very lively neighborhood, and there was always a lot of people in our house. And when I was about 6 years old, one of the neighbors, and also my father was a pilot, and he had some pilots over, and they were drinking beer and having fun. And one of them said, "Oh, my favorite poem is, I sat in the jail with my back to the wall. A red-headed woman was the cause of it all." And everybody laughed, and I thought, I was able to kind of understand it, but for a long time, I stayed away from red-headed people. I thought, I'll end up in jail if I hang out with red-headed people. But the whole idea of it, and then we used to do limericks. They were PG, of course, in our house. And so I think that was part of the hook. And then once I got to school, the teachers encouraged a lot of writing, and especially poetry.
Well, I'll share a quick little story about limericks. I took a poetry class in college, and the professor said, "Any genre of poetry you'd like." So I wrote a limerick, and he was not pleased. So I didn't consider myself much of a poet at that point, but that's where I got my poetry started. Anyway, so you just started naturally early, and you were encouraged. Is it the rhyming patterns that really caught your attention in the beginning?
Yeah, I have to probably say more the music and the sound of poetry. Of course, that included rhyme, but I could hear the alliteration going on, and then later, maybe third, fourth grade, we, it wasn't called the imagery then, but the teachers emphasized using the five senses, and I really responded to that, and to this day, I try to bring in imagery in my own work.
Tell me about some of the works that you've had published.
Well, recently I had a poem published in Writing in a Woman's Voice, which is an online journal. And this poem, I must have sent it out 25 times. And I would get good responses from it, but nobody would publish it. So it's a poem about my father's gambling. And he actually was a runner-up on a Chevy Impala, 1958 Chevy Impala. He lost out, and the consolation prize was a set of Melmac dishes. And when he got home, he tried to break them, and Melmac does not break. So that incident is in the poem.
How interesting. So when you sit down to write a poem, I want to take us on a little lesson of how you begin. What is it like? The imagery and the music of the poem has been floating around your head, and it starts to solidify, and then it's got to come out and be put on paper? Or do you just start with something small and work around that?
Usually a line comes to me, or if I'm in a situation like I have a pond behind my house, and I noticed a couple of days ago, that a great white egret was just looking down in, at its own reflection. And so that gave me an idea of, what does it see? Does it fall? And then I got the idea, like Narcissus, does it fall in love with itself when it sees itself in the reflection in the pond? So I'm playing around with that. And then I was in Italy this summer, and we were all at breakfast at the hotel, and a black monarch got caught in my hair. And my daughter-in-law said, "Oh, that's good luck." And someone else said, "Oh, it means that you're about to have a change in your life." And then the server was standing beside me, and she went like this, and she said, "No, it means that someone who has passed has stopped to say hello." So that was just a gift. And so I ended up writing about my mother who has passed.
You were going to be one of our presenters at the 2022 Florida Writer Con.
Correct.
Tell me, if people were going to, attend the workshop, what?
My activity is called the Family Poem. And the idea is, you choose a family member or an incident that maybe happened. And I think families are such a rich source of, because that's our first relationships. And of course, some of our deepest relationships. But the way that I teach, I work through the writing process. I do a lot of brainstorming, kind of discussing things, and maybe people share stories about their mother, their father, right? Their Aunt Myrtle, whatever it is. And, then I actually have a copy of the activity. So what I do, instead of just saying, write about your mother, I have, I have sort of a fill in the blanks idea. So it's sort of like, one of the things I ask them is, describe when your mother or father are getting up in the morning, and what is their routine? What are they wearing? So, and then talk about the mood of your mother. Like, is your mother like kind of gung-ho, or is she, needs a cigarette and a coffee, as my mother always did? So, and then one of the things I ask them to do is talk about a favorite expression that your parent had. You can write about any family member. So, and then, I think through brainstorming and sharing, people just click. And, and before they know it, they've written a lot down. And then I have a couple of other guides that I use to get the story going. And then I model some other poems by poets, and in this activity, I've got a poem about a mother by Ted Kuzer, just heartbreakingly beautiful, and one about fathers and sons. And so I think it'll be fun.
How many times do you revise a poem?
Well, I have one poem that is 8 lines long, and I had revised it 24 times. And I had taken it to a workshop, and someone said, you need a color of the shirt, because the last line. And as soon as I did it, the whole poem just fell together. And it was published shortly after that in a very good journal. So, but it's amazing, just, and the funny part is I use a lot of color in my own work, but in this case, I hadn't added a color, but once I did, it just sort of brought the whole relationship and the tension of the poem, just everything came together just by adding one, and it was the red shirt.
I'd like to ask about how you reflect on someone else's poems.
Well, I read a lot of, poetry. There's things that I really love. You can tell when a poet loves language. But the other thing is you you have in poetry, it's the perfect word in the perfect place. So syntax and order is extremely important. And I have a workshop here in Sarasota. And one of the things that I end up telling a lot of the poets in the group is, this line is beautiful, but it doesn't belong here. It belongs there. So I'm always looking for, that good order. Again, I like music in poetry because, it began as a sound genre. It was an oral tradition. And that's why, if you can have some kind of music, and the music can just be the rhythm of the lines and the breath pause, all of that goes together. So, I like imagery. So I'm always looking for that. I'm looking for comparisons, maybe, I recently finished reading, this was in a short story by Eudora Welty, and she's describing her experience as a candy striper. And she said, when I walked into the hospital, it smelled like the inside of a clock. And, that has just stayed with me, and first of all, what does the clock smell like? But it could be maybe metal, wood, something. But that's the kind of description that, even though she's a prose writer, it's the poetry in her work that has elevated it. I don't think I've answered your question. But maybe
poetry is so subjective.
True.
I may love a certain poem and other people will be like, give me a squinty eyed look about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is subjective and it's based on our own experiences.
Yeah, but
much like relationships, really.
Emily Dickinson once said that I know it's a poem when the top of my head feels like it's been blown off. And so those are the poems I'm looking for, that you just go, you almost can't breathe. It's just so beautiful.
You translate poems as well from other language into English.
Yeah, I've worked a lot with my students. I've done Mandarin, Spanish. And those are the two languages that I've worked translations for.
And how does that work? So do you actually know those languages, or does somebody present them to you?
I know a little Spanish, but I didn't know any Mandarin. But so what I have the student do is, in this case, she was Chinese. So she wrote out the exact words in English. And then we looked at, how would this sound? So, you had to sort of adjust things. And then we looked at other translations of the poem. And there was one poem by Li Bo that it was a plural, like it was Quiet Night Thoughts, but the title was single. But later in the poem, he pluralizes it. And she said, this is wrong. It should be, and we both agreed it should be plural. So that translation was published, and the editor commented on that most of the translations of that poem, they had done it as single, but it's plural because he's describing many different thoughts in it.
Interesting. So I imagine that type of exercise really helps you clarify the understanding of poetry, because you're not just trying to paint a picture and an image, but you're actually combining language and meaning.
Yes. And that's why you kind of have to adjust, because in English, we wouldn't say this, we wouldn't. And then, of course, there's, in most of the Romance language, the adjective comes after the noun. So, obviously we have to change that. But, that's a really good strategy. So, and I've used that in my own writing, is like, I'll put the noun down and then put the adjective after, and it has a really nice rhythm to it that it doesn't normally have in English, you know, and it emphasizes the adjective because it's come after the noun. Yeah, and that's something I would have never tried, you know, if I hadn't done these translations.
Well, Gail Ghai, how could people get in touch with you?
You have my email address, right? So by email is probably the best way.
All right. Are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Sure, go.
What is your favorite color?
Black.
Well, that's interesting. I'm sure we could go into a whole story right there. Do you have any stickers or magnets on your refrigerator?
Yes, I have one with Ruth Ginsburg.
And what do you plan to do this afternoon?
I'm revising 2 poems.
Well, very good. Gail Ghai, thank you so much for stopping by.
Oh, thank you, Alison.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. Boo. We're all done. Gail Ghai is the author of 3 poetry chapbooks, has earned a Pushcart nomination and Henry C. Frick Scholarship for Creative Writing. Her writing has appeared in worldwide publications including Descant, the Yearbook of American Poetry, Delhi London Quarterly, Poet Lore, JAMA, and Burning Wood Journal. Join Gail for a workshop about family and poetries at the Florida WriterCon beginning October 28th, 2022. It will be a weekend jam-packed with networking opportunities, workshops, awards, book signings, and a youth summit. For more information, visit floridawriters.org.